Recording in progress.
Recording in progress.
I think we're just about ready to go. Just one more important detail. We have another new member. They just keep cropping up one after the other. Carol is our new member as of this evening. Well, we're very pleased to have David here. He was out in the field today. He told me he came straight from the field. So he's fresh from working with eagles.
I'm dirty, not fresh.
Everybody knows David by reputation, if not in person, of course. David and the Hancock Wildlife Foundation is synonymous with bald eagles here in the lower mainland. He's done a tremendous amount of good work over many decades with bald eagles, and he'll talk to us a bit about that this evening. David's a graduate of UBC, and he spent UBC alumni could clap. Yeah. He spent most of his life studying West Coast and Arctic wildlife. He's the author of The Bald Eagles of Alaska.
There's some there for people. Well, first people have them grab.
Okay, some publications. First come, first serve. Bald Eagles of Alaska, BC, and Washington, along with many scientific papers. I didn't know that you were a pilot, David. He was a pilot and a wildlife film producer prior to founding the Hancock Wildlife Foundation in 2006 with fellow director Dr. David Bird, whom we also know and love. When he learned to fly as a teenager, it was primarily to allow him to get closer to his favorite birds. He's focused much of his effort on bald eagle adaptation to the urban environment and is involved in various bald eagle projects, including his pioneering program broadcasting live streaming web cameras to the general public. He's helping to develop the Bald Eagle Tracking Alliance in the Fraser Valley. And he told me tonight that Delta is probably has a higher density of breeding bald eagles than any other city in
the world. Of any kind of eagle.
Wow. So he'll talk about it tonight. He'll talk about his plans to re-nest bald eagles in their natural habitat, the results of tracker studies, and the impact of heat domes and avian influenza on eagles in the Boundary Bay area. I give you David Hancock.
Well, thank you very kindly. It's a delight to be here, and I'm sorry I'm a bit of a ragamuffin. So I went to one of my favorite shots. This is a bird that had a bad hair day, and I feel somewhat sympathetic to him. Two people, at least in this room, haven't heard me talk before. I'm astounded. So and they kept asking, of course, the same question. So I'm going to take the liberty of recapping some of these early days, because I caught my first hawk when I was 12. And I had been catching quail and pigeons. And then this particular day, I saw a guy get out of a car on the hillside by where we lived in a little farm. And he had a dog jump out. And then he turned out to be a peregrine falcon. And he flew it over the field where I was lying, waiting to trap fantail pigeons. And I went out and saw him. It was Frank Beebe from the Provincial Museum. And that changed my life. He asked me all the things about what I did. And I said, well, I'm catching pigeons right now. And I have a quail trap down in the gully over there. And he said, oh, what kind of trap? And I defined it. He said, well, that's nearly a hawk trap. If you did this and this to that entranceway, you'd probably catch the first hawk that went in after your first quail. Just on the way home and modified the traps. Sure enough, that evening, I caught my first Cooper's hawk. And my dad, because I couldn't remember this man's name, my father had to track down who this guy was. And by 9 o'clock that night, we had found out it was Mr. Beebe. And he then put jesses on the bird, and I became a falconer. And then by the time I was 14, I'd worked my way up through Cooper's hawks and goshawks and peregrines. And I had my first bald eagle. And I was already a rehabber because I was the recipient of all the eagles and soon to become seals and bear cubs and cougars and whatever else game branch was getting, I ended up recipient of them because we didn't have owl or any other rehabbers over here except Alan Best, who was at the Vancouver Zoo, Stanley Park in that case. And he got most things. I got the island stuff. But then he'd get too many bears every winter, so many slides up in the big mountains up above Hope and so on. And he'd be calling me, David, I got 3 more bear cubs for you. And so I was a rehabber, or my mother in particular was the rehabber. But that's how I got my footings in all this. By the time I got to be 15, I was so enamored by birds that flew, I had to learn to fly. And ironically, on the hillside beside our house was a little private airstrip. And if you know anything about little tiny airplanes, 600-700-pound airplanes, 800-pound airplanes, and their pilots, they always want to share their experiences and allow young kids to fly them. So provided I would help watch their airplanes, I'd get to go flying them. So by the time I was 15, I'd already enrolled at the Victoria Airport, put in all my time for all the exams and put in the time for my license. I then had to wait for a number of months until I became 16 to get both the pilot's license and the driver's license, which I got the same day. So I got an early start on flying. But the interesting thing, and this is kind of fascinating, I think to most of you here, in the flying around the Victoria Airport, I was basically into that southern part of the Gulf Islands. And I came up with 116 nests. And then it dawned on me, well, oh, I'm over in American Island. Oh, who cares? They don't care. No, it's a long time before 9/11. It was 1952. So, no, I guess it's more than that. I was 14, 15. Yeah, 53. So it turns out I would cover the San Juan Islands, and there wasn't a damn eagle in the San Juan Island. Lots of old, deserted, falling apart nests, but not one single eagle, which 10 years later, when I ended up doing a thesis, I did it much more systematically and more extensively, covered every Gulf Island and every San Juan Island, and it was the same circumstance. No eagles were yet nesting in Washington State. They had eliminated them all. So on my 16th birthday, my dad loaned me his car. And I came across from Sydney to here, and I went down past through Delta, Semiahmoo Reserve, and out onto the docks in Blaine. And there is when I learned about the Alaska fishing fleet. Half of it ties up in Blaine, and the other kind of quarter at least. A few people actually live in Alaska that fish there, but not many. The rest of them live in the Gulf Island. And on the back of every boat was a white bucket with eagle legs. No eagles, eagle legs, because they got a $2 bounty for every pair of eagle legs that they turned in when they got back to Alaska. So that's why Western Washington, the coastal area, simply had no nesting eagles. They had shot every damn one of them. I mean, it was a bucket of legs. This is kind of shocking. Gasoline was sold by the gallon. Do you remember those big things? Gallon? 23 cents a gallon. 23 cents. So with $2 for an eagle, they got 8 gallons of gasoline. That was a lot of gas. You fill up a bucket of eagle legs, you could go all the way to Alaska and all the way back again on the bounty paid by killing our eagles. And the biggest numbers of Americans shooting eagles were right there off Delta. Boundary Bay, well, Semiahmoo side of Boundary Bay. But all our eagles are what, 6 wing beats away in a 20-second glide, and they're working in the Semiahmoo base on that side or in the Blaine Harbor, and they simply never came back. So when I was doing my early studies, then later my thesis studies, the 63, 4, 5, 6, I still had only in 63 3 pairs of eagles between Point Roberts, Point Atkinson, and Hope. The entire valley, 3 pairs, and all 3 were in the Vancouver Harbor. One at Kate's Point, one at Point Atkinson, and one in Stanley Park. There were no eagles out here at all. There was none at Point Atkinson. They had eliminated the whole population. It kind of it forced me into becoming an eagle biologist. I quickly became, when I graduated from high school, a commercial pilot. But I decided that I didn't really want to be a bus driver. I wanted to be a flying biologist. And so that's what I ended up doing. Because in those days, there was simply no jobs for biologists except as teachers or the 5 biologists who worked for the government. And I knew all 5 of them. None of them were planning to retire. You know, they all worked and met every day at the Provincial Museum to have lunch, coffee, I should say, with Frank Beebe, because he was the focal point of nature in British Columbia for the whole time he was there. He was such an inspiration to everybody. He was a character. He had a photographic mind. He's the only person that read every botany book, every intertidal marine book, every book on anthropology, every mammal bird book. He was their artist. When he read and skimmed every book, every journal that came in, every one of those scientists in all the field came to him to do the biographies for every publication that they did. And he also did all the drawings for all those hundreds of publications that the museum put out for that period of 40 years. And so all these biologists used him as such an incredible resource, and he was my mentor all my life. So I obviously ended up with this kind of a guy with a really inspirational point of view of dealing with wildlife. And I've always been so thankful for that. So I hope some of you also are kind of mentors to other people I've tried to be in my life, because I think it's a necessary thing for us older folks, or even when we're younger, to guide some of the really young people along better in this way, because boy, we're sure missing a lot of good pathways. One thing that's missing in life for most young people coming up is some kind of incentive to get involved in wildlife and wildlife appreciation. So that's how I got involved in all this. I wanted to give you this update. I have to apologize. It's been such a chaotic year. In fact, it's been a chaotic 4 years. We had a heat dome 4 years ago, which was the first major time in recent years that I have seen a lot of dead eagles. Used to when they were shooting still. But I would come up in certain rivers and up and down the coast and flying and landing, and you'd come and find 15 and 20 dead eagles along the shoreline. These people, they were hunters, fishermen, particularly, not hunters, but fishermen, who just had been conditioned by a bounty that eagles were bad. It was never occurred to a fisherman that the demise of the salmon didn't matter where you were, they were being diminished and could have ever been blamed on human beings. It just never occurred to them. It was always either the eagles or the orcas that were the cause of the demise of the ecosystem. And so every time you killed one, you reinforced your contribution to nature by hoisting a dead eagle. I mean, it was an obscene thing. Fortunately, I lived past that. And that's kind of what led me on further. And it wasn't for very long. Right? Into the 60s and into the 70s, you could see the shift take place. And it all really happened in the world by one person. Anybody know who that one person was? Rachel Carson. V. I mean, she was supported by a whole bunch of other biologists doing similar studies. She, however, had the presence of mind to bring it all together in Silent Spring, that monumental book. And it changed the world. And it changed it so incredibly positively. Not only did we get bans on pesticides and other an awareness of the deadliness, so many things that we introduced into the wild, but the public became sympathetic to the cause. And we got an Endangered Species Act, and we got a whole bunch of other things that followed. And it became the turning point of our awareness of the sensitivity of wildlife to being persecuted unjustly, and sometimes inadvertently, as in the case of the pesticides. Initially, it was inadvertent, that was killing everything off. I mean, the pesticides were developed as really a big popular thing to kill bugs on the servicemen in the trenches. But at the same time, it was a whole group of biologists and anthropologists trying to figure out how to grow more crops in confined areas, and where normally the transmission of diseases and parasites would have kept things more difficult and more in order. But pesticides rocked the balance of the scale so much in favor of humans. It just eliminated all the bugs. But of course, as we all now know, Silent Spring eliminated so many of the songbirds, particularly the predators that were living on the dead songbirds. And having witnessed this kind of growth of understanding was encouraging. And I have to say that it drove me on to spending my lifetime in the same field, in public education. I did not want to work for government, so I went into making wildlife films and writing stories and things. And so, and then, and this is what partly I'm going to show you, but I'm not going to show you as much as I'm going to tell you. What has happened in that last 50, 60 years? I'm going to sit down for one thing. That's one of the challenges of getting old. The legs don't work quite as well. I've been up on them all day. One of the most fascinating parts of my life has been to be able to go out and work with the animals and kind of understand them. But because I came into my maturity with Frank Beebe, who was a practical person, trapping and handling and dealing with live creatures, it became very obvious that as we do many, many things to destroy things, sometimes I said inadvertently, but also out of a greed because we're wanting something else, I took the position that, well, maybe we could do some positive things. And what became so apparent when you start to study eagles in and around people is that we both have such an interest in the same ecosystem. I mean, we all love the water's edge. This is how most of us got here. We got here either on a boat, it was coming by the sea most frequently here, but in most of the continents, it was coming down the rivers to the coast or to the lakes and so on. And as we worked those waterways, because you could travel them in your canoes, you tended to cut down the trees and you use them. You use them for wood, for building your houses. And of course, as soon as we got here, it was an industry waiting to be all these big trees waiting to be cut down and sent to Europe. And so we did it. And when you look at many of, well, you live in the world's most degraded habitat in many ways for eagles, and that's Boundary Bay and Delta. It has had all the major trees taken from it, which they want to nest in. And eagles here are largely nesting in new emerging cottonwoods, which grow very quick, fortunately, but it's a relatively new tree here. It would be up in the slide areas and so on, but not as many in the low down. And in the outer part of the valley here. And the result is that we've had eagles move, well, all their big trees disappeared. They were, to a large extent, cut down. There's a few exceptions. Boundary Bay on the east side, White Rock, Crescent Beach. It has a wonderful big area. And the guests here today from Vancouver, they have one of the other most interesting areas of historic big conifers, and that is the UBC lands, but it's being decimated every year from when I went there. When I went there, there was 10,000 students at the, I thought that was a huge number. How could they have 10,000 students at the universities? What do they have now? So
62,000.
62,000, my God. And probably the 6 times they've depleted the big trees by probably a 6 times, 6 of them now. So the point I'm getting at is Delta, more than anywhere else, cut down all the big conifers because the Boundary Bay would have been surrounded by some kind of conifers. And I began to experiment with this kind of practical aspect that I had of seeing eagles largely trying to live in old abandoned, or not abandoned, but thank you, new red-tailed nests. In almost every nest in the early years was a red-tailed nest, just expanded to hold an eagle. And so I started to reinforce red-tailed nests, and then I started to build eagle nests. And so pretty soon, I mean, this is where people, you can find encouragement. There was a Wildlife Act that protected eagles in eagle nest trees for a long time, 30, 40 years now. But they never enforced it. And the argument was, well, those 2 arguments. Number 1 was, well, you don't want to get in the road of developer making a buck. And the second one was, well, what would we do as an alternative? So the minister just would sign it off. Protected element, nest the tree, except it was simpler to just not do anything. Until I started to say, there is a way, and it's not complicated, and it's very simple. And you just have to build a bloody nest for them or expand the nest. And now literally after we got to control, and I say we, meaning the foundation, got to control the dates at which things happen, like when you take out a nest or when you build it. And you don't want to do it when an eagle is watching you. That's the first no-no. In fact, I want to tell you another small story. Early on, when I was doing those early first surveys, one of the things that was so noticeable to me, because I was also a bander. I'd been a bander from 13 on. And I used to go to some of the seabird colony islands off Sydney and Victoria and band hundreds of gulls and cormorants and so on. So it was not a big step for me to want to trap eagles and hawks and band them. And I did a lot of that. But I kept records of where I went. And I never went to an eagle's nest and banded the young, that the eagles went back to the nest the next year. They always raised their young. I've never been to an eagle's nest, find it banded the young, that the eagles didn't raise those young. Never once in those early years did I find that the eagles went back to that nest the next year. They always built a new nest. So I thought, well, that's kind of devastating, particularly in an area where there's very few prey options. And then in the early 60s, one of the first talks I gave, which was a good talk, and if anybody wants to emulate it here, please consider it. I was invited to talk to the Canadian Audubon Society. We had one. We don't now, but we had one. I don't think it's because I gave a talk that it didn't. I was so terrified. But we had one, and I was the guest speaker one year. I followed the year after, the year before me, it was Prince Philip, because I was kind of pleased to follow him. But I'd also given him, and I had been the one that handed the Queen her peregrine falcon
Frank handed the prince his fall, a provincial gift a few years before. Anyway, the point I'm getting at is, and I got to give a talk back there. And there was some people up from the American Museum to this annual meeting. And I got an instant invitation to give my talk like 3 days later again in New York at the American Museum. And from there, I was said, well, why don't you come down to Florida? We have a whole series of people down there who really love eagles because we used to have an eagle man here, Mr. Charles Broley. Anybody here know about Mr. Broley? He was a Canadian, but he retired to Florida at 65. Maybe he retired at 60, but probably not. He was at the American Museum asking what could he do to help with nature. And at 65, I think it was 65, they said, well, why don't, since you spend most of your winter in Florida, why don't you ban eagles? He never even handled an eagle, let alone banned one. He ended up banding just under 1,500 eagles over the next 25 years. It was like, he was very old. You thought he was ancient. I'm only 86 and I'm a kid still. Anyway, he was known as the Eagle Man. It was his book called The Eagle Man. It was the first book I ever bought at 15. It had just come out. So I was an enamored fan of his. And so when they said, come to Florida and walk, we'll see some of Mr. Broley's eagles next. Well, I got to see a lot of them. And I got to the very southern tip of the, what do you call the islands? The ones that go to the Keys. The very last island has Audubon House on. I guess it was Mr. Audubon's guest house at one point. And they're showing me through it. I was the guest of the Audubon biologist. And the lady who ran the house said, oh, you're interested in eagles. You know something? I've got, and she took me over to this shelf, and there was 8 notebooks of Mr. Broley's. All his records of banding. And I said, class them. I want to read them all. And so Sandy Sprung said, why don't you just take them home and make sure you send them back? So I got to take them all back to Vancouver. And I read them all. 3 times in the course of his life, he records in his notebooks. Can't understand why bald eagles build a new nest every year. Every year, every one of his eagles built a new nest. Well, it was pretty obvious to me why they built it. He had been banding all the chicks, and every year they had to build a new one because he went in and disrupted the nest. Now, he had no test, no control. I had a control of hundreds of nests because I was flying them, only banding a few. But most of them I wasn't going anywhere near, and so I had a wonderful control. He had no control. He had only his test. And it never occurred to him that the reason they built a new nest every year was him. His entry into those damn nests. And so I came back from that, wrote this up as a paper, was to present it at the first American Bald Eagle Symposia. And at that point, I was one of the few, I was a kid, but I was one of the few eagle biologists around. And when the Audubon Society read the chapter of the paper that was going to be published about biologists being the major disruptor of eagles, they decided this wasn't a good part of the paper, but I'd take it out. And I thought hard and long on it, but I had had 3 years of acknowledgement. So with 3 years of studying my eagles by this time, a lot of them. And I realized that even though every year they built a new nest, they still kept producing young. They just go over 1 or 2 trees and build new nests. That impacted me greatly. Number one, about do we have the right to kind of interfere with scientists and what they're doing? But maybe sometimes conscience from another perspective is not all that bad, because it didn't really seem to hurt the eagle population. except that I filed it away and there was another side of this. As soon as you got into areas that weren't wilderness or big tracts of thousands of hundreds of miles, in Mr. Broly's case, with the whole central core of Florida, was big pine forest, and the eagles just went from one tree to the next and built new one every year. In my case, most of the banding I did was out on the West Coast, and there was also almost adjacent to every tree is another tree. It's not like here where almost every tree in many parts of the Fraser Valley has an eagle's nest in it. I mean, when I go to say, oh, gee, I'm really interested in your eagles, and well, we're kind of keeping that secret. And I said, well, I won't do anything to harm them. And then when I got to putting cameras in there, well, you sure you're not going to destroy my eagle? Well, I drew on this old knowledge that if I climbed the tree, it was likely going to be catastrophic for the eagles. So I never, ever went into nests again when eagles were present. I only went when they were off on migration. So if I was putting cameras in, they didn't see it, they'd come back. I don't know, those of you who saw my first broadcast, there weren't cameras that I put in. Another dear old gentleman, Doug Carrick, put it in and had it on his television, not on the web, but on his television. And he showed it on a 10-minute video at a talk I was giving it for French Creek one year. And he put his talk on just before I was to give a talk. And I was blown away watching in his camera, the eagle came back from its migration, landed on the side of the nest. The camera was running. The eagle looks at the camera, walks across the nest, and it can actually reach the camera. And it goes up, goes bang, and with his beak in the center of it gets at his image in the lens, and it goes click. And it turns away. Never bothers with that damn camera again. It probably landed on 100 fish boats or beside 100 towers with their light beaming and flashing, and this was another kind of like that, and it paid no more attention to it. And so the cameras themselves were of no concern to the eagles. It was the big predator, the human in the nest, was the problem. And so I had that as a backup guidance as I took to installing cameras. We'd never do it when the eagles were around, and I never banded eaglets again, except ones that fell out of nests and I got the raw owl. I wasn't going to go into nests that were in and around where people were watching them and find out that they weren't there the next year. And that guy is the treasure of his property was he had an eagle's nest, and now it's on 2 properties over because they had to go 400 yards to find another tree. So fortunately, I never lost an eagle's nest this way. So that's some stories about how one got into all this, and how scientists sometimes have second thoughts on what they're doing, but we catch up to it eventually. And fortunately, my tales that like I just told you, has kept a lot of people from disturbing eagles in and around beach, because you're allowed to get chastised for it, and for good reason. And I have never had a problem of driving people's eagles away. So I've been quite fortunate from those early studies. So I started to mention we've had 4 years, bad times. And I apologize, I haven't summarized this, but we are just doing all that right now. In fact, I spent the last, much of the last 8-9 months working on 2 big books, one of which is really our mitigation challenges, how to build eagle nests for people, because it's become quite popular. I'll tell you what's happened in a few minutes here. But the practical aspects are so simple. It's just understanding the biology of the eagle and not expecting to have him watch you do it. You do all the work for him behind the scenes, so he doesn't see you in the nest. And if we built a nest in a tree, once we convinced the government, and when they first said, well, we'll get them to build 2 nests for one, I said, well, okay, let's build one somewhere else. Like, well, this will be an alternative nest here because you got it wrong. So the first 8 or 10 nests I built in trees, I said, they're going to nest in that one, not in that one, even though they couldn't see why I would choose that. But I felt, since I was right every single time, they finally said, well, we'll let you build a second nest somewhere else. So then I started to build nests outside the territories and started to expand territory to new areas. So the government has been really exemplary in taking the advice of somebody who was of concern. And that's not common. I have to tell you, it's not common. And I've been so pleased with it, so they convinced me I should write this. And I'm about to go away, and I'm not going to be here. Some of them asked me, would I go with them this fall to the Harrison, because for 25 years I've been taking people up and down the Harrison. Last year it was a big film crew because we were doing another big, this one's for the National Geographic, and it's going to be on the Disney Channel, being released next year. But anyway, the bottom line is I'm not going to be here this November because I'm leaving on October the 20th. And I'm going to go for 2.5 months on a bloody cruise, so I'm not disturbed. I'm not going to take it. I won't be looking at emails or answering telephones. I'm going to finish this book. And the other book that I'm working on is my, which is about half done. So I'm going to, those are the kind of things I'm working on. But what is fascinating, when I did my thesis way back, had all that data together about the numbers of eagles in the Gulf Islands versus elsewhere, the numbers that we visited with helicopters, which were devastating, as well as the ones that we were climbing. Not fixed wings, they don't give a damn about fixed wings. And anyway, the bottom line is all that data has been sitting there for the 40 years. They took it out of the paper I wrote. And rereading it, I had forgotten, other than the final point of it, that eagles don't accept people in their nest. But I had it all summarized. It was all done and summarized, and not just take tables and everything. And so we've redone all of it. Because of COVID and because of Kinder Morgan and the bloody pipeline that we were all, so much of us are against. But Kinder Morgan, in screwing up things, has had to pay some things. And the U.S. the Canadian Wildlife Service got a huge grant, one of the grants. And John Elliott, Dr. Elliott, has focused the study on studying the atmospheric discharges from general industry and humanity of the Fraser Valley. And so he had postulated or proposed putting 100 air censusing stations at about 80, 90 feet up throughout the valley, and then going back and testing every eagle near these testing stations, the nestlings themselves, and testing the blood and the tissues. Well, when this all came through to be a reality, the study, which was being funded, it turns out the Canadian Wildlife Service had the money for the study. Had just set down the criteria that none of their biologists were allowed to go in the field because they might get COVID. So for the 3 years that they had the money, John wasn't allowed to go and do the studies. So Miles, my associate, and we did the study, but with predominantly Miles that did the study for them, and he did all the bloodletting and organized it. It was our database of all of our nests, and so they went and we didn't let them go into nests right beside people's houses, but we tried not to. At least a couple of them they didn't know they were, but we tried to have them go to nests that weren't being closely observed in the valley. And so now we've got all this data, not just of what humans did in disturbing eagles back in the 60s and the eagle's response, climbing and or visiting with a helicopter to count the eagle's eggs and so on. But now we've had it again by climbing 80 nests to do bloodletting and so on to study these eagles. So we got involved in this. I agreed to be part of the study and use our database. It would enable us to re-examine the same issue 60 years later. So now we have a 60-year difference in the databases than now. And it turns out, as kind of I expected and kind of hoped, and there may be two explanations to this, but the first thing in my mind was the eagles might adapt because, boy, nobody knows better about how eagles adapt to humans than you people. I mean, you got them in your backyards, half of you. And still, in many remote areas, the eagles are still relatively wild about people and easily disturbed. But here, they're not disturbed. They're in almost every, by the way, 3 nests in 1963, 4, and 5 in the entire valley. If you've heard me say it, don't say it, but any of you who don't know how many I have, any of you guess how many I have now in the Fraser Valley between West Van, Point Roberts? No, 776 nests. That's a kind of a change of numbers that's not been witnessed anywhere in the world. So I have been, that's part of what kept me going also. Because we're not doing everything bad. We can do things that enable things to proceed somewhat satisfactorily. So anyway, we had this database. Now we got this comparison of then and now. And so this is part of one of the first big papers that we're going to use in it. And in part, it justifies, when put with some of the other data, how easy and simple it is to just build eagles a new home when they've lost them. And I mean, it's hard for governments to become the big development. Like we just went through it on the West. The nest that we took out this week, or took the cone out of a nest. It was over in Mosquito Creek, North Vancouver. It's a $600 million project. Well, it was to start with. As things happened in North Vancouver, it's probably $4 billion today. It was projected to be $600 million, and in the middle of the development, one nice big cottonwood with a big nest in it, and they wanted to remove it. And they didn't mind investing $200,000. My cost to come up with the solution was $5,000. Because there was 9 other groups of government agencies that had to put their word in on it. It cost another $200,000. Anyway, we built the nest. We got the eagles to stay there, and it's quite complicated. It's one of the things happen. But anyway, that pair has been staying there every year since. And this year, one of the nests that we put there for them got coned, so they couldn't nest in it because the nest we really wanted, but it was, for a reason, it wasn't allowed initially. It was 12 feet too close. I'll have to tell you, it was 12 feet too close to what is called a buffer zone. Anyway, the bottom line was we took the cone out of it, so hopefully the eagles will use their offshore nest. We had this drilled offshore and the big pole put in the intertidal zone, and the eagles use the nest every day for a feeding perch, and we put a cone in it so they couldn't nest in it. And we had it all tied down, and 3 days ago we took the cone out. It's very interesting. I had the cone made, and it was very heavy. It was made of heavy steel and or aluminum, and it weighs about 40 pounds. And it was tied down all around the outside of the nest of the eagle, but it was tied down with rope thick. And every one of these ropes, those eagles had torn every single one all the way around. They'd shattered and that cone was just sitting there with no ropes on it. There was just piled of. They want that damn nest. Boy, do they ever want that. And they now, when they get back, I hope to hell they're pleased, because it's now back empty for them. There's no cone in it. That cone is now going into the nest that they used last year. The other nest we built for them ended up, and this is the same problem, partly. It ended up with dead chicks from avian influenza. And almost every nest that had avian influenza, but the big chicks died, not the little tiny ones that normally one kills the other in fratricide when they're small. But when they die of avian influenza, it's usually when they're big. And that nest lost it had young in it every year, and then it lost a young from avian influenza, and they built a new nest. And that new nest was not in a good tree, and definitely wasn't in a good location, because two other developers were right on the edge of it, and it was interfered with it, and they stopped it nesting last year. Good old BC Hydro. They kill more bloody eagles than any other organization, probably in North America and the world. But I'm not allowed to say that, so I'll let you that's not right. Anyway, so we're just about to publish a whole bunch of things, and those same results are going to go in this book to give the world, because here's another little next no, on the 24th I go to California, and I'm building a big nest down there. Well, I'm not going to climb the tree, or I say I build them. I'll go up and build them in the tree if I can get a lift up there, but I'm not climbing the trees anymore. I quit that. And quite some years ago, to be honest, but I'll go up and build them and install the cameras if I can get there. But they got to get up. And the one in California is along a river, and you have to get there by boat. So I'm not building that. We got a climber who's going to do it, but I've been talking to him the last 3 nights, and he's got all the stuff I wanted ready. And so I'm going to go down there and simply supervise it. But then we go. This is the kind of thing that's encouraging. An ecologist from a big company and does things for big oil companies. He happened to watch our first cameras in those nests when they were in Sydney. When we launched cams to the world. And we were the first people that ever had cameras in wildlife nests that were ever publicized. And according to Microsoft, for 2 years, 2006 and 2007, the fun little fact here for you to remember, they said we had the world's largest website. The world's largest website. And do you know who had it before us? The Pope. That would be particularly delightful to me, but it was. But by the time we'd gone on 2 years, a whole bunch of people, hundreds of have been helping all get cameras in eagle nests, and then crane nests, and stork nests, and penguin nests, and so on. And so what's now happened, not just camera data, but this ecologist watched our website, and he saw what we were doing with building nests for them. And so I'm going down, I'm taking Miles with me, and we're going down on the 8th or 9th of October. And we just built the 2 nests. I just got them all completed last week, and 2 of them started with. And we're taking them down to the Gulf Coast of Texas and installing them as a mitigation for a big oil company project down there. I'm not allowed to say which one, because it's all secretive stuff. Nonsense. But anyway, we're going down to do it. So the next thing I'm looking forward to, you got to have imagination for something, slow as I am at times. But I'm looking forward to Architectural Digest doing an annual issue on fancy and advancing eagle nest design. And my friend, who used to be the director of the Calgary Zoo and was where we formed the Hancock Wildlife Foundation in his art studio. He just did me a marvelous big painting, and it's one of our nests with a heat dome on it, so it's got the protection that we learned now. We build the heat dome, we build the artificial nest in pole with a heat dome, give them some shelter. Which who would have thought of doing that before the heat dome year? But and then below the eagle in his nest up there, below it, like White Rock, and some of you may have been to Russ's nest. When he moved into this house, he pulled those 4 houses, built the biggest house in most of Canada, and he took me up onto when the house was about 8 years into being built. Took 10, and there was no windows in yet. He took me up. My bed is going to be here, David. And those 24-foot long windows coming down. I wanted in that tree right there. Well, we got them to nest right in that tree right there. And he was rather impressed in that. After the birds were there a couple of days, Dave, what could I do next? And I said, well, they would really appreciate it if you gave them a swimming pool, because they're in those nests and they have no really nice fresh water. They're down there on the beach, but they can't bathe salt water. They have to bathe in fresh water because it gets sticky. So I designed him a swimming pool and for eagles, and he put it in. It's just a little bit farther than the corner of this building, right there away from his office. And every day his eagles come down and bathe in front of him. And the first flight, chicks from the nest, they go down and have a bath because they've been watching their parents do this every day. So, I mean, he's a big fan. So it occurred to me, I'll get my friend who was an artist up there, and he just sent me down this wonderful big rendering of this nest, a swimming pool with a bird there, and a nice elegant house in the background. So that's going to be what I think is going to be what the Architectural Digest. You have to make a kind of dream that they're going to slice on, grab onto this, and I'm going to get requests from all over North America to build them so that they've got their own bloody eagle nest in their yard. I don't know, that's fanciful, but I'm allowed that every once in a while. Anyway, so what I want to do, because I've been telling you some of these stories, and I haven't been showing you anything, because I was so busy, I just didn't get to do a lot of these things. And I pulled up on this, if I couldn't find it on there, I've pulled up one of my earlier talks, but I'll try to relate it to the things that we deal with now. What I love about this photograph, this covers our eagles. And if you ever get a chance to go on a tour in the winter, particularly in January, the landfill, you'll sometimes see 2,000 and 3,000 eagles in the landfill in the winter. And this is kind of typical. This happens to be a photo I took long before that. But what it shows is this range of our eagles, and you get to really see them nicely at the landfill, because there'll be 100 posts along a fence line, and every single post will have an eagle out. So you can go drive alongside and right, 1-year-old, 2-year-old, 5-year-old, 4-year-old, 3-year-old. Oh, full adult, maybe 7 to 30. I mean, because once they get over that 6-7 year, you can't tell. Anyway, this bird in the middle, that adult, is a wonderful adult. And I cannot tell you how old that bird is, because after about 6 years, they lose all black flecks in their head. And so it's just and same with the tail, the outer tail feathers of a 5 and a 6-year-old bird have marks on them that if you get to see the tail feathers properly, you know what age it is. This is it's a full adult. So that's kind of nice. There it is in the center of the picture. The bird on the left is, of course, a bird of the year. That's a fledgling. I mean, it's not a fledgling, it's a bird that's first year flying. Was a fledgling, probably 5 months before this photo was taken. And it's still in its first plumage. It's going to hold that plumage until the next June, July, and August, when it makes its first molt. The bird on the right is a 3-year-old. The 2-year-old doesn't have as many white specks on it. And if you can't see it because of the breast on this one, the breast of the eagle is incredibly distinctive. You can tell every age, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the breast. They're very distinct, looking at the feather mold. The back of a 2 and 3-year-old can't really tell. I know it's a 3-year-old because it's got a bit more head markings, because I can see the head. And then a 4th-year bird has more markings on the head and butt. And the butt is the big thing. A 4th-year bird has the dark, I call it the black plumage. It's not black, it's very dark adult plumage. It's like this dark brown, the adult. The 4-year-old gets the dark brown plumage again, but he doesn't yet have a white head. He doesn't get the white head until he's 5 years old, but he's already got the darkened plumage almost complete. So just it's a nice group of eagles, but and in the new book I'm doing, there'd be a whole bunch, and I'm going to do a website thing about it. They're precisely the same. That shows them all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Harder to see the 6, but close ups you can see. I kind of like this because this is the totem pole. Most of you may have seen it, particularly Peter and yeah, Flora. It was the totem pole that sat outside the Maritime Museum in Vancouver. And it was the favorite daily perch. They nested just a few hundred yards away in Vanier. And we've had to build them a series of nests because they were in the road where they didn't want them. And then we put in even an artificial pole and nest, and but they didn't take the other nest out. And so they naturally went to their old nest. Now their other nest fell, and they now use for the first time our artificial pole. They raised their young there this year. But unfortunately, it's a stressful time downtown. As my favorite adversary, the BC Hydro, contributes heavily to. The town's full of power lines, and we lose more eagles due to electrocution. They don't get killed by these big high tension power lines that traverse the valley, these big ones up 140 feet. They never kill any eagles because the lines are far apart and they can't hit 2 lines with their wings. It's the town wires, which are only this far apart, and they go down, hit 2 wings, and there's a big bang and explosion of a bird, and people lose their power, and there's a dead eagle. And crows know how to deal with eagles when they're in their neighborhood, because there's a few of you here I know that know about crows and eagles, the relationship. For 5 days in the life of a crow, crows are heavily predated on, and hundreds of crows die in the last 5 days before they learn to fly. All over the world, crows do the same thing. They nest in a relatively small nest. There's usually 3 or 4 of them. And as they get big and they start to fill this nest out, and they want to exercise, they become branchers. And it's a term that is called, they're called branchers. All over the world, they're called branchers, whatever language it is, because they all do this. They come out of it and they run up and down the branches, gaining exercise as their wings are, the feathers, all their feathers are growing out from the flight feather. It takes about 5, 6, 7 days for the last half to grow. Well, once the eagles see them running along the branch, they're just in there. It's a free and easy meal because they can knock them off and then grab them as they're going down. Well, crows never forget that. Never forget. The rest of their life is spent getting even. And so many eagles die every year because the crows know how to drive them into the power lines. It's just a fact. They know that. Yeah. The crows are so clever. The big crow studies of the world have been done just right here in Seattle. And they've done things that indicate how these crows, they're unbelievably bright. The parents can tell the children for 2 generations if they see a man, that's a bad man versus a not a bad. They can describe him in advance. in advance. So that when that crow sees that bad guy, he's never been seen with his parent. He now knows to make a certain call. They know this. They've transmitted this information. They're incredibly clever. So I mean, I nearly did my PhD on crows, and then somebody gave me that Audubon meeting I was at that day. They found out that there wasn't money for my study. They said, "How much did I need?" And I said, "Well, I need the problem. I needed $25,000. I needed to buy a float plane." Doesn't hurt to ask on a lady took out her checkbook and gave me 25,000. David Hancock wasn't even made out to the university. So I was kind of lucky. So sometimes it pays to make your requests. So if any of you feel in that kind of a check, I mean, I don't see me ever. I'll tell you what the world of eagles needs. Anyway, where the hell did I get down?
Crows.
Yeah, crows. Yeah, and so this relationship of crows and being so damn smart. As I said, I nearly did my thesis on crows. That's what it was. Yeah, but I ended up getting that money, and so I was able to do it on eagle. So lovely bird, but I love crows too. So and this is just some nice ones. Oh yeah, it's coming up. So this is very typical. You can see this little tid. This bird here is probably a 6-year bird. And if you can see the edge of this outer feather there, and the outer feather, which is hiding right there, there's little black gray specks along it. This is a 6-year-old bird. If you were to get really close in here, you'd see 1 or 2 specks of feathers on the head. Now, this is a bald crow. This is really a bald eagle, but no. This is obviously a tricky vulture, but they do have a bald head. And bald eagles were called bald because of an early English word coming from the French that the bald was white. And that's how they became called bald eagle. But this is a bird that many of you have got to see more recently. It's become relatively common and now breeds quite big numbers on the Gulf Islands, up many of our inlets coming up Fraser. Any day in the summer, at my house, and I live right on Zero Avenue, I'm as far south as you can get. There's half a dozen turkey vultures come past our home every day. So it's an interesting bird. That bird weighs, well, bald eagles, males weigh, about 5 to 8 pounds. A big, very big, fat male eagle in domestic captivity. We have one of this goes 9. Females weigh 9, 10, 11, 12. And I happen to this year never caught one over 11 pounds, 8 ounces. Oh, yeah, sorry, it's not grams. But most of you prefer the. But there is a 14-pound bald eagle that was caught in Alaska. Probably a young bird, because as some of you now know, I know some of you know this, the day the eaglet leaves the nest, it has longer wings, wider wings, and it weighs more than it will ever weigh again in its life. And the interesting thing about that is I often have people come, "Oh, I saw this small eagle flying around." "Oh, it was a white-headed one, was it?" "Oh, no, it was the young one, the baby one." Well, the day they leave the nest, they're bigger than they're ever going to be again in their life. They get, for the first 5 years, a little bit shorter wing, a little bit narrower wing. They get more competent in their ability to maneuver and fly until they get to be mature, when they finally learn at 5 years of age how to hunt. But it takes them a long time. They're very inefficient as far as hunters. Anyway, so eagles will go, males 5, 6, 8 pounds, males, and females will go 9, 10, 11, usually up to 11.5 pounds. This little bird has a big wingspan, almost like an osprey, the same size. Ospreys have a 6-foot wingspan, look like a male eagle. Females can go 7. This bird, it looks about the same size, but it's only 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. It just looks small. I mean, it is small. It doesn't look small, it looks big. So it's a bit deceiving. Oh, there's the osprey as well. And it has almost the same wingspan as the bald eagle. But it only weighs 5 pounds, 6 pounds. It's incredibly maneuverable on the wing and the light wing. Outmaneuver an eagle. And this is how they can, in fact, we're putting until early this morning. We were going to put an eagle's nest in Nickelwood, the golf course. We're putting a new bald eagle nest in for them, and got them to agree that we're funding from another source, the Kinder Morgan source, an osprey nest, and it's kind of neat. Oh, am I getting too long-winded here? I wondered if you were.
I thought you might need a drink of water.
Oh, okay. And here's our other adversary, or friend in arms here. That's a golden eagle on the right, and that's very typical of golden eagle with a white underpatch, particularly on a young bird. That's a young golden eagle. In fact, that's one we just released. If you look close, it actually is banded. That was up in Montana. Oh, good on you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Good. Thank you.
Do they have golden eagles in BC?
Do they have golden eagles where?
In BC.
Oh, yeah. Oh, lots of them in BC. Not many down here, but every year or one or every second year, there's one comes into Delta. For 3 years in a row, 3 times now in my following in Delta, there's been a bird, and probably the same bird, because it was 1, 2, 3 years, and then it was a couple of years when it wasn't there, but it was a young bird when it first came. The next year it was 2 years old, and the third year it was, so we think it was the same one. Always hunted exactly the same fields and sat on the same boat. Did it for 3 years, then a couple of years went by, and then another young bird came in, did it for 3 years, then the third one. And that was on 72nd. Many of you might have seen it. And all 3 of these eagles hunted the same damn ditch. Because it was easy, I think, for waterfowl. They quickly learn what is the right sequence of surprising and how to nail one, drive off out over land where they can quickly grab it. Now we have a guy. I live on Zero Avenue, but I live in South Surrey. If you follow Zero Avenue right until it goes up over the coast, beginning of the Coast Mountains, you have to go around a couple of deer because it doesn't quite go all the way through, but it does go right at the mountain. There's a valley there, and this side of the valley comes down to Canada, and that side of the valley goes up on the US. And coming through that damn valley, there are hundreds and hundreds of golden eagles every year. But also every other raptor that you've never even heard of in British Columbia are coming through there. It's unbelievable. And this is some of the best Vancouver birders have been documenting this. And they've been keeping it kind of secretive. But it's fascinating that we get so few golden eagles out here, and they get them there by the hundreds, literally. And they're going, and they cross the valley, and they either go up the Fraser, or they cross over and go up the Harrison. Just huge numbers, but there are huge numbers of golden eagles all through the Rockies, all the way down to Mexico. So we're just having them come out, funnel out of here, and then they go back in and go up the actual Fraser Canyon, because they're predominantly Arctic breeder. Most of them are breeding in the high Arctic. There's a lot breeding through the mountain. There's there is one the last couple of years on Vancouver Island up by Aerosmith, but the local golden eagle that bred it is on Friday Harbor or San Juan Island, because they have the whole island is a breeding colony of rabbits. thousands and thousands, and golden eagle are mammal feeders, they're not fish feeders. See, that's why they don't really want to be around here. They don't want fish at all. And but over there on that island, there's one year or a few years, there were two pairs. And the first year we had a camera in Goldstream in Victoria. We had a golden eagle come there, and it was living on the ducks and the geese. It was in among all our bald eagles and a stellar sea eagle that we caught on the cameras the first year. The stellars. Anyway, it's a wondrous bird, but it's not. It can be a scavenger, like our bald eagle is a scavenger for 6 months of the year. They just don't bother hunting in the wintertime. They, from mid-June, when the first of the dead salmon are piling up on the rivers in Alaska, right through to when they end down here, which used to be into February. It's now that they're lucky to last until the end of December, into January. But for those 6 months, all the big northern population of eagles, most eagles are bred in the north. We have a nice little group of them here up and down the coast, but the big breeding area of eagles for North America is the boreal forest across Canada. Every lake has got fishing on it. Every lake has an eagle, but of course it's all frozen up in the winter, so they all have to move out, and that's why we get the 35 to 50,000 eagles every winter. They are the boreal forest eagles that are coming down here, and they come down, they work out through here, then they make the slow move back up again to be up there in March and particularly April, when all those northern lakes open up again for them. Our birds already got young by then down.
What's the size comparison to a golden eagle to a bald eagle, a full answer?
For all intents and purposes, exactly the same. Oh, really? Yeah. I mean, somebody says it's in the literature that they're bigger. Well, most of them are smaller because there's a lot more bald eagles than there are golden eagles. So, I have never caught a big golden eagle that was any bigger than a bald eagle, but there is apparently was a 14 pounds bald eagle, a golden eagle caught in Alaska one time, and it was a 2 ounces bigger than the biggest gold. So they say they're bigger, but they're frozen. They're just about the same. The only really big eagle in this kind of discussion is you go across under the water here and you go over to the Japanese islands, up to the Sea of Okhotsk in Russia. They have two eagles there. They have one like a bald eagle, which is the Eurasian white-tailed sea eagle. Just as all intents and purposes, it's a bald eagle. It's a white tail, body that looks like the young go through the same plumage change, but the head is gray. It's not white. It's only gray, not even looking white. And then they have the magnificent eagle, the stellar sea. I took some people here. We took three of us, and we spent 2-3 weeks on the ice floes out off Japan, off the north end of Hokkaido. And they have hundreds of them come in there, and they have 10 big boats that hold 40 to 50 photographers as a trip. And there's 10 of them going all day long, taking people out to watch them. They feed, they throw out food for all these eagles out onto the ice floes, off on the north end there. And there's a place on land about 50 miles, 40 miles south, 30 miles south, also on Hokkaido, the southern part of the island, where there's a big frozen lake, and they take snow carts and they haul out 400 or 500 pounds of fish at a time, and they dump it out. There'll be a line for 250, 350 meters in a semi-curve lined up along the shore. Every one of these guys with a lens this long, and they're all Chinese. They're from the mainland of China, and they come down to Japan. It's just a huge tourist business. And we did a film on this a couple of 3 years, in fact, the year before COVID. It's quite spectacular. If you ever want to go and see a lot of eagles in the middle of winter, it was about 10 to 20 below every day we were there. So just go prepared for cold weather, but it's spectacular, absolutely spectacular. Oh, here's the first year bird, second, third, and the fourth year bird. See how he's quite different. And then of course the fifth year bird is this one. Oh, is this one? This is the fifth year bird. He's got quite a bit of gray on the head, spots on the head. Oh, then we get to the full adult. Oh, I can't seem to go back. Anyway, there we are. So I don't know how long I'm in. This is only the beginning of this talk. This is one I use for schools and talk about their tools, their eyes. This isn't really what what's all about. Their feet, or how they grab their dinner, and their beak is how they tear it apart. The most important tool of a bird, particularly a predator, is the feathers. Without good feathers, he's dead. And so, as a young falconer, that's the first thing you learn as a falconer. Protect your hawk's or falcon's feathers so that they can effectively fly and chase quarry. So it's really important. And this is why the bird, see, this one has a broken feather. See it there. But that feather is going to be dropped after at least every 2 to 3 years. All the primary feathers are changed. You can see them. These are you see it?
No, yes.
Oh, you can't see it. Sorry.
No.
Oh, damn. I thought you could see the pointer out there. Sometimes you can. Anyway, well, on that previous photo, you could see the difference in the aging. Feather that's a year, 2 and 3 year old. This is how life starts with eagles. And I think this is always such an incredible photograph because that female has to tolerate those great killing talons in the middle of her back as she's prepared to get mated. And there's sometimes quite unpleasant if you've ever, I give a course on eagle language, but I'm not going into the detail right now. But some of the things said here are not really for every conversation, but I do give special lessons on it. This is a lovely shot. This is one of the first places I really learned about eagles and disturbance. I could not, when I first started this study way back in the 50s, it turns out that's when Rachel was pulling together all her data on pesticide. And there was a great worry that the eagles, the bald eagle of the Mississippi River in the valley, were all getting pesticide ridden and loaded. And so the worry was, is it happening here? So I was the only one doing anything out here. And so I climbed a whole bunch of trees and collected eggs and took some, and our eagles had no pesticides in them at all, because where would they have got them? They wouldn't have got them, and they didn't get them because we didn't have any pesticides on the ground at this point. So I was going to compensate for that. I was going to go and disturb the hell out of them by climbing their nests and visiting them with helicopters. And this is the shot where I was in that helicopter because I couldn't get an eagle off its eggs to know how many eggs they had. Nobody really did a big study about this ever at this point. And so we wanted to know how many. Well, I could fly. I could even have my float plane nick the branches above the nest. She wouldn't get off her eggs. They don't give a damn about fixed wing airplanes. They see you coming and they see you go. And that's all they do. They know you're going. But helicopter is a totally different thing. They're getting upset and excited, and when they see you coming toward them, and by the time you get within 150 to 200 meters, they're very agitated. By the time you get within 200 feet, they're already up and ready to leave. And this is what really was exciting to me, because I got to count eagles, and I finally got to see them. I said, I'm in that helicopter, and I took that picture that you can see it. She stood up, but we're just far enough away that she didn't leave. And we were already turning away, and I could get to see how many eggs she had. and so on. That, by the way, that nest is a wonderful nest. It's on the end of Salt Spring. 2 years later, they had to cut that down for a housing development. And we had it drilled and cored, and that nest was 668 years old. And that branch that this is sitting on, see this big, oh, that's right, I can't stream. Yeah, there. This branch here that supported this huge nest. My guess is, thank you. My suspicion is that nest built up like it was, could have been there for 500 years. Yeah, wouldn't that have been a wonderful story? I mean, I've got some nests I've visited for 50 years, but 500, I don't think I'm gonna make it. Yeah, I don't think so. But a wonderful story, and that how many generations of eagles must have nested there to keep that thing going. Because some cases, the eagles only last a year or 2 years at our nests, and one of them is lost. They're usually electrocuted in town. And they get another mate and carry on. But so that's a beautiful. That nest, as you can see, the bird is 3 feet long. That nest is about 10, 11 feet across. It's not a little nest. You could hold half a classroom of kids there and have a wonderful party.
David, if I could interrupt.
Yeah.
Many of us would spend all night here.
I know. I know they do.
Wrap up in the next 5 or 6.
Sure, I will.
And allow time for questions.
That's precisely what I want to do. It now got to where, oh, damn, this one isn't going to.
Do they always just add to the nest, or do they sing out the?
They add to the nest every year. But some pairs, whether it's the area, it seems to be the area, don't seem to do a lot of building. There's other areas where, my God, the nest grows and grows and grows, and almost covers up what we're doing with the camera. It blocks it off. But see, this is, yeah, she's rolling the eggs. Kind of wonderful. So, and this is, of course, the next thing that we'll be having. Our eagles are all away right now. They'll be coming back, and they'll all be doing this, we hope. It's quite an awesome sight to see this. So I'll just leave this bird doing this. We've talked about a whole bunch of things. If some of you have a specific questions you'd love to ask, I'd love to try and answer them or make out something bigger. Yeah.
I lived in Kitts, down Kitts Beach.
Yes.
Like water. And I see a lot of people here.
There is one right at Kitts Line.
And there was a tree, not very far away. It was like where the wall is. And an eagle went into the tree, and another eagle came up with it. And honest, this is true. They came flying over, but then they started tumbling in front of me, like I could have touched them if I had opened up the window. I'd be right in front of me, and I never had a camera because I was afraid that they were going to crash the window. But they were doing this tumbling thing, grabbing onto each other, and they were so close that one of them even pooped on my window. But
what a blessing you had! What a blessing! If you were an American, you'd know what that was. That was payday. Because the term in the United States, if you work for the federal government, you don't get paid unless the eagle shits. Yeah. So, that was a blessing for it. But what you witnessed was aggression. If they're grabbing at each other, this is aggression. One bird intruded onto the other bird's territory. There's a lot of courtship flying, but courtship flying is, you can tell they're not aggressive. Yeah. They're enjoying, they're doing things like this and swooping and so on. A lot of eagles will go up and they'll grab talons together and do one, maybe 2 flips, and then go off in opposite direction. And then more frequently, it's young birds than it is adults. They're just having fun. It was doing a somersault.
it was amazing.
Yeah, but You probably witnessed an aggression. One bird was invading another bird's territory, and there's going to be repercussions, and often they're deadly. They're often deadly, yeah. So, yeah, but it has been recorded in the literature, unfortunately. Where they go up and they lock talons and they tumble down and they're mating. I don't know. Nobody hears this. I think no. That's not how it happens. That is aggression.
Yeah.
It is not mating. If you watch our nests, you'll see sometimes they mate 3 and 4 times a day. They will start to mate the day they come back on October the 2nd or whatever it is, and they'll be mating several times a day, every day until they leave at the end of July. They've been mating every day, and it's strengthening the bond. It happens all the time. They love mating. Yes.
I'm curious about the nests you build. How do you build them? And do you happen to have a slide? One?
I think that several of the talks have 1 or 2. I think at the very end of this group, there might be one on the end here.
Tons.
You want to see a nest, an artificial nest. Do I have one here or not? This is about the biology, not the, I might have had it. No, no, I didn't have one here. Sorry. If you go to our website, you'll see lots of them. I mean, that's the other thing. I always think the local people see all that kind of detail because we have a lot of nests on the website and more all the time. And the nest I was at all day. This is in West Vancouver. It'll have 2 cameras functional. Now, to be honest, I have advised the people who funded this thing that because both chicks were big and they died of avian influenza, I said there's a high likelihood that they will not nest there this year. And that's the case. But there was no dead chicks in this nest when we went up this morning. So either they've already been removed by ravens and so on. This morning I thought there was going to be a dead chick in the nest because a raven's nest, I thought possibly still eating on the dead carcass. The guys didn't see the carcass in the nest this morning. So if the nesting is determined by the female, whether she's going to accept that nest or not. If the female is lost during the winter, it will be a new female and she'll likely go accepted by the male. She might accept this nest because she won't know about the history. And so this, I suspect, is I'm hoping is maybe what happens there this year, because if it's the same female, they probably won't nest in this nest. And that's what I advise the people who funded the cameras. But I mean, they said, well, let's risk it. And we've got the money to do it. And so they did it. They did on a GoFundMe. So that's, I'm sorry, I don't have one here. I have a whole talk on it, but it's not one that I got a chance to bring today. Yes.
I didn't know it was avian flu.
Well, we don't always, but we do know for a lot of them was because there's a quick study that they do it at Owl, and they say they can determine whether it's avian influenza or not avian influenza. And John Elliott was Mr. Disease for the area. Yeah. So, and when we saw them dead, you follow our white rock nest, the one that Wes has, and then our camera looked at the birds had a chick die and they went down and built a new nest. We could still follow that new nest right there. And over there, 270 feet yards, was another nest. We can see that nest. And over this way, 270 more yards, was a third nest. This is like your area. They're packed in where there's trees. Our nest had one dead, had one, it had one, the next nest had two dead ones, and the one over there had one that was 10.5 weeks of age, just about 11 weeks of age. It fell out of the nest and it was analyzed, and it had avian influenza. So we're pretty sure that these bigger young are dying from avian influenza. The little ones are dying from sibling rivalry. And that has been a common thing throughout, because almost every nest in North America lays 2 eggs, almost every. And hardly ever wilderness areas, not towns. Towns are much more productive than wilderness. And in wilderness areas, they basically lay fledge one young. But towns are much more productive. There's a lot more food in towns, and in and around people, everywhere. You had a question.
About how much does a nest weigh? Sure.
Well, that one you just saw there might have weighed a ton. There have been nests that weigh a ton, but they're usually not. That was a nest you could see it was growing up, and it was from here up to there. But there are trees that the crotches are like that, and they just get bigger and bigger until they collapse the tree. And they weighed, one of them weighed 2,100 pounds. And they're big. They don't usually get that big here. They blow off about the same rate when they get to a certain size, which is about like this and about this thick. And they stay there. What they add blows off in winter. Yeah. Yeah.
I hear a mating story. It'll be less than 3 minutes.
Yes, go ahead.
We live in my Forest Grove over in Tawasin area, and Page Grove, sorry. And we walk down there, it's about 2 blocks from our house often.
The one by the school?
Yes,
Yeah.
to see what's sort of going on there, the time, birds and something. And so one day there was a log that had most of the branches broken off where it's a winter storm blew up. And there was a pair of eagles there, and one was looking at the end, looking out across the lawn, and the other one approached from behind her, and she was but anyway, he mounted her, and about 15 seconds later, it was over, and he turned.
Oh, that was a good long time. That was
And walked away. He said he's just gonna walk away. And Jim said he's gonna go have a cigarette.
We speak our own truths. Yeah.
In Hill Park near Victoria, with an eagle that was our nest.
On the Government Street side, right there. Yeah, I've known the nest. Yeah. And about it, yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't think it's still there, is it?
I don't know how to get for 2 years.
No, I asked about this last week to somebody, they said they thought it was gone now, but it had been there for a number of years.
Somebody once told me that it was a female of the eagles have bigger mouth. Was that true or not?
They have bigger everything. They have bigger bodies, they weigh 9 to 12, 13 pounds. And males are only 5.5, 6 to 7, 8 pounds usually. So they're bigger, much bigger. They are dominant. They have bigger head, bigger beaks, bigger feet. They have bigger wings, they are bigger. Yeah, they are just bigger and they're dominant. Definitely. Yes.
Tim, that with the lack of conifers, they're choosing to build aquatic legs.